Chapter 26, The White Violin. The white violin was more elegant, more shapely and entrancing than Richard could have ever imagined. Its form was perfect, with sweeping curves and style. Richard realized that, just like in his dream, he could not look away. It seemed so beautiful and happy, basking in the sunlight. He was drawn to it and found that he couldn't resist its charm. He knelt beside the violin and reached out. After caressing its surface, he rotated it on the stand. The white violin slowly turned, and to Richard it seemed happy and free. It mesmerized him, and he continued staring while turning it around and around. After finally realizing that the hot desert sun was burning his skin, Richard reluctantly retraced his steps down the stairs. There had been music coming from inside the shop, and as a new song began playing, it caught his attention. He stopped about halfway down the steps and listened. The melody floated through the walls and penetrated Richard's soul. It was Michelle's favorite song, the first piece of sheet music that he had found in the music store so long ago that December night. The cover had a picture of 3 young men sitting against a boat that had washed up on shore. Young and foolish. Why is it wrong to be young and foolish? Richard knew every word and found himself softly whispering, smiling in the sunlight, laughing in the rain. I wish that we were young and foolish again. As the words faded, Richard looked back up the stairs and a thought crossed his mind. He began wondering if he were still lying in the hotel room back in St. George, dreaming, or, his mind wandering still farther, was he lying on his bed in the hotel room the night of his last concert, after talking with Janice and Julia from the Herald? Had Samuel's words about needing something triggered his mind and started him dreaming again? Or was all of this some kind of joke or conspiracy amongst his parents and friends? They knew the songs he had given to Michelle. They knew his feelings about her. Could they have talked to Joe and Margie Ross and even found out about Michelle's birthmark? After thinking about Mark and Circe, his mother and father, Michelle's parents, and Sam, Richard realized that none of them would have ever considered being involved in anything so cruel, especially after his torment in the asylum. He felt ashamed for even thinking it and continued down to the bottom of the stairs. "So what's going on?" he asked while opening the door of the Blazer and climbing in. "Is this Luthier more than just a man? Is this all some kind of miracle?" Richard decided that he should drive back to his hotel room and think about everything before talking with the Luthier again. He put the key in the ignition and started the engine. He then looked at the small flashlight hanging from the keychain and realized that he had to know. There was a man sitting less than 100 feet away with all of the answers, and Richard decided that he wasn't going to wait any longer. He felt raging anger and frustration, curiosity and determination, passionate love and deep hatred. He felt every emotion possible as he opened the door to the violin shop and walked in. Every emotion except sympathy. The luthier was in the workshop, leaning over his bench. His head was resting in his arms, and he was surrounded by bottles of varnish-making ingredients. The old record player's volume was turned up all the way, and he didn't move when Richard approached him. As the song faded, Richard looked more closely. There were tears flowing across the surface of the bench, and the luthier's body began shaking in convulsions. As the next selection started playing, Richard knew why. He remembered the last time that he had heard the song, and by the end of the first line, it felt like it had only been yesterday. Yet it wasn't. It was years before, in the asylum. Richard lay on his cold, thin bed, shivering. He couldn't remember how long he had been there. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't remember anything except Michelle's lifeless face cradled in his arms. It was all he could see. Richard's body finally gave in to the exhaustion, and he closed his eyes. Instead of relief, his sleep brought nightmarish dreams that tormented his soul like the twisted thorns of the briar patch. While he lay half-conscious, struggling to regain the smallest portion of his sanity, music came floating down the hall like a demon with a knife. Once upon a time, a girl with moonlight in her eyes put her hand in mine and said she loved me so. But that was once upon a time, very long ago. All of Richard's other experiences in the asylum were a hazy blur in his mind, but that night and the cold, cruel words of that song would be part of him forever. How the breeze rustled through her hair, how we always met as though tomorrow wasn't there. "Stop it!" Richard screamed. He put his hands over his ears and stood up, then staggered toward the door. We were young and didn't have a care. Where did it go? "Stop it! I can't take any more!" he yelled down the hall at the janitor, whose radio was responsible for his misery. The janitor continued mopping, not seeming to care what Richard was screaming about. Once upon a time... "Stop it!" he cried again. But no one was listening, and Richard began banging his head against the bars in the door, trying to get the image out of his mind. The janitor turned the volume up, and the song kept playing, despite Richard's screams and protests. The words seemed to go on forever while Richard moaned and sobbed. He hammered his head against the door until his face began bleeding. Everything was ours. How happy we were then. But somehow, once upon a time, never comes again. Even after the music stopped playing, it kept running through Richard's mind. It mocked his soul and tormented him until it finally stabbed a large, jagged hole right through the middle of his empty heart. He then dropped to the floor and beat himself unconscious in a pool of blood and tears. Richard has now become an extreme risk patient at the asylum. He has tried to hurt himself many times in the past, but last night, we believe, he tried to kill himself. The doctor calmly informed George and Elaine Gaspar. They had questioned the straitjacket and restraining bands that had been placed on Richard since their last visit. He was making progress until last night, but his reasoning capabilities have now become disrupted to the point of requiring constant sedation. Richard's parents looked at each other as though Richard had died. Elaine broke down in George's arms and began sobbing. The doctor continued. His latest outbreak seems to stem from a certain song that was playing on the janitor's radio, "Once Upon a Time" by the Lettermen. Richard began reliving all of the pain and misery he had suffered in the asylum, and he quickly backed away. Memories, nightmares, and hopelessness. Somehow, Richard realized while watching the luthier writhing against the surface of his desk in pain, he knows. Richard's questions quickly turned into sympathy for the luthier while remembering everything that he had experienced. After recalling his worst nightmares in the asylum, he looked up at the ceiling. He could only imagine what the luthier saw and felt. Even though Richard had said, "I am ready," before leaving the asylum, he had gone back to the park the very next day so he could stand between the two trees and remember Michelle before getting on with his life. But before he had even entered the gate, he noticed that a large playground had been built right where the two trees had once stood. There were children playing there, and somehow it softened his grief. Yet he was still left with a hollow, empty feeling that he had never been able to fill. Richard thought of how much the luthier loved trees and wondered what he must feel each time he chopped one down and split it up. Then, what he must experience while watching them hang from the ceiling to become ready for his violins. Somehow, he knows what I went through. Somehow, he feels it, Richard realized, and he slowly backed away toward the door. The luthier wept as the song continued, and Richard thought of the waitress he had spoken of while in the restaurant. Richard believed that he could now understand the luthier's words. It is impossible to understand what those that serve us go through. Before the song was over, Richard had shifted the blazer into gear and was driving toward St. George. He would not return until the violin was finished.